Do you think the players know that if there is effectively no 2026 season, the WNBA as we knew it is dead?
The WNBA is standing on the edge of a disaster that could wipe out nearly 3 decades of progress. After years of fighting for recognition, packed arenas, and rising TV ratings, the league now faces its most dangerous enemy yet, its own players. Rumors of a player-led lockout have exploded across the league.
Folks, it took 27 years for the WNBA to finally get a respectable audience. And in a matter of 2 seasons, they're about to lose said respectable audience.
With stars like Nafisa Collier and Breena Stewart allegedly ready to pull the plug on the 2026 season. Behind the scenes, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver is quietly stepping in, desperate to prevent a total collapse that could erase everything the WNBA has built. This isn't just about contracts or salaries anymore, it's about survival. Because if the players follow through on their threats and the season disappears, the WNBA may never recover. What happens next could decide whether women's basketball rises to new heights or vanishes from America's spotlight forever.
Do you think people are going to tune back in after taking a year off from watching WNBA basketball? Do you think people are going to be putting WNBA viewing as their priority above NFL, above college football, above Major League Baseball, above tennis, above golf? Do you think that's still going to be the case if there's no 2026 season?
For nearly 3 decades, the WNBA has fought tooth and nail to earn the respect it finally began to enjoy. From its humble beginnings in the late 90s to the explosive rise of modern stars like Caitlin Clark and A'ja Wilson, the league seemed to be reaching a turning point. Ratings were climbing, merchandise sales were soaring, and media coverage was finally matching the intensity of the athletes themselves. For the first time in its history, people weren't just aware of the WNBA, they were invested. But in the blink of an eye, all that momentum now stands on the verge of being wiped away.
The only people who have something to gain with no 2026 WNBA season is Breena Stewart, co-founder of Unrivaled, Nafisa Collier, co-founder of Unrivaled, and Alex Basil, Nafisa Collier's husband. Those are the only ones who have something to gain of no 2026 season.
The warning signs were subtle at first. Whispers about player frustration over pay gaps and revenue sharing quietly echoed through locker rooms. Then, as CBA negotiations dragged on, those whispers turned into public discontent. The very athletes who had fought for visibility were suddenly threatening to walk away from the game entirely. A potential lockout isn't just another labor dispute. It's an existential threat to a league that has spent 27 years crawling toward legitimacy. It took decades to convince casual sports fans to tune in. It took the emergence of charismatic stars and heartbreaking moments to bring viewers who once ignored women's basketball into the fold. The 2024 and 2025 seasons proved that when given the spotlight, the WNBA could deliver electric, emotional basketball that rivaled any other professional league. But the audience that was finally built is fragile. Take away just 1 season, and the attention shifts permanently.
Unrivaled viewership, I'm sure, will grow slightly, but it will grow if there's no 2026 season. But again, Unrivaled is 3v3. There's no WNBA taking place head-to-head with Unrivaled. The only way Unrivaled fully benefits from a WNBA lockout, fully capitalizes, that's the word I was looking for, from a WNBA lockout, is if they get an influx of money and they go into a 5v5 format.
Think about how easily fans move on in the crowded sports world. The NFL dominates fall Sundays. College football has its cult following. Baseball and golf fill the summer months. If 2026 comes and goes without a WNBA season, how many of those new fans will come back? Realistically, very few. Once habits fade and excitement cools, it's nearly impossible to reignite that spark. Even the most loyal supporters may find themselves drifting toward other sports that never stopped playing. The devastating truth is that the WNBA doesn't have the same safety net as men's leagues. The NBA, NFL, and MLB can survive a strike or lockout, because they've spent generations building deep cultural roots. The WNBA is still fighting for that recognition.
How many of you guys have been watching the WNBA finals after the year that we just had? How many of you guys are suffering from what I like to call WNBA fatigue? Yeah, I'm good on the finals. Don't care. I have no horse in the race. I'm not entertained by watching non-Indiana Fever basketball. I just can't do it to myself. I'd rather watch the Major League Baseball playoffs. I'd rather watch college football. I'd rather watch the NFL. I would rather watch other things than the Las Vegas Aces versus the Phoenix Mercury. Sorry, I just can't do it.
Missing an entire season would feel less like a pause and more like a funeral. Sponsors would back away. Networks would shift their focus. The players who once carried the league could find themselves forgotten in an instant. That's why this moment feels so tense. The players claim they're standing up for fairness and transparency, but the risk they're taking is enormous. The league's survival isn't guaranteed. The fragile foundation that took 27 years to build is cracking under pressure. And if this lockout becomes reality, everything could come crashing down. But the question remains, who stands to gain from that collapse? The answer leads straight to Unrivaled and the stars behind it.
But if there is a lockout and there is no 2026 season, fans aren't coming back. They're not. They're not going to come back for 2027. They're just not. They're just not. Simply put.
While most players are dreading the idea of a WNBA lockout, a small group might quietly welcome it. Leading that group are Nafisa Collier and Breanna Stewart, two of the biggest names in women's basketball and the co-founders of a competing league known as Unrivaled. On the surface, Unrivaled was built as a fresh player-first alternative, faster games, better pay distribution, and a platform that promises freedom from league politics. But beneath that polished mission lies a much deeper game, one that benefits the founders only if the WNBA falls apart. If the WNBA's 2026 season is canceled, Unrivaled becomes the only show in town. No competition, no shared attention, no comparisons. The entire women's basketball spotlight would shift toward Collier and Stewart's side project, granting them control over talent, sponsorships, and media narrative. What's even more telling is that Unrivaled's format, a 3v3 style tournament, currently lacks the serious attention of traditional fans. Most sports viewers see it as a novelty, not a league. But if the WNBA goes dark, even casual fans might give it a look out of curiosity. That's the opportunity Collier and Stewart are quietly banking on. Yet there's a catch. For Unrivaled to truly thrive, it can't stay in its current form. Right now, it's too small to compete. No matter how marketable it tries to appear, 3v3 basketball doesn't have the drama, the rivalries, or the grand stage of 5v5 professional play. For Unrivaled to truly capitalize on a WNBA collapse, it would need an influx of cash expansion to a 5v5 model, and the signing of at least 50 elite-level players, essentially rebuilding the WNBA under a new banner. That's not an easy leap, but with the right timing, it could happen, and a lockout provides that perfect storm. The business side is where things get even murky. Collier's husband, Alex Basil, is also deeply involved with Unrivaled, overseeing its operations and media push. Insiders have speculated that he could be the real strategist behind this quiet coup, helping turn frustration over WNBA pay into leverage for his wife's league. If players feel alienated, if negotiations sour, Unrivaled becomes the escape route, a place to play and protest at the same time. But fans aren't blind. Many see this movement not as empowerment, but as sabotage. They argue that Collier and Stewart are using genuine grievances to destabilize the WNBA for personal gain. And if that's true, then the biggest losers aren't the owners. It's the players who just want to play, and the fans who've waited decades for this sport to matter. Because in every power struggle, someone profits from chaos. And while the WNBA teeters on the brink, the shadow of Unrivaled grows longer. But there's one man who might step in to stop that collapse before it's too late, and his name is Adam Silver. When the WNBA spirals into crisis, there's only one person powerful enough to intervene: NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. For years, Silver has acted as the silent guardian of the WNBA. overseeing it from a distance while letting Commissioner Kathy Engelbert manage day-to-day operations. But now, with a lockout looming and the league's future hanging by a thread, his quiet oversight may not be enough. The question is whether he'll step in to save the WNBA or to take it over completely. Adam Silver knows what's at stake. The WNBA isn't just another sports property. It's a public reflection of the NBA's commitment to equality and growth. If the Women's League collapses, it's a direct embarrassment to the NBA brand. The optics would be catastrophic. Billions invested in inclusion, sponsorships, and broadcast rights could crumble overnight. Silver can't afford to let that happen. But fixing this crisis requires more than diplomacy. It demands control, and that's something Engelbert may not be willing to give up. Silver's history shows he isn't afraid to take decisive action when a league's image is on the line. When the NBA faced scandals, ownership feuds, and social unrest, Silver acted swiftly, making tough calls that often reshaped the landscape of the sport. In this situation, he may be forced to do the same. If negotiations between players and the WNBA leadership break down, Silver could easily justify stepping in, claiming that the integrity of professional women's basketball depends on his leadership. And honestly, he wouldn't be wrong. The heart of this battle lies in money and trust. Players want the same treatment and revenue share as their male counterparts, a 50-50 split similar to the NBA. But the problem is structural. The NBA owns half the WNBA, and franchise owners hold the rest. If players were to receive half of total league revenue, owners would essentially be giving up their share entirely. That math doesn't work for them, no matter how fair it sounds. Still, without transparency about how much the league truly makes players feel like they're being misled, that's where the tension explodes. Adam Silver's challenge is walking a tightrope between these two sides, honoring player concerns without alienating ownership. If he sides too hard with the players, the owners revolt. If he backs the owners too strongly, the players bolt for Unrivaled. Either way, the WNBA risks collapse. Yet Silver's greatest weapon has always been optics. He understands narrative power better than anyone. By positioning himself as the savior who steps in when leadership falters, he could simultaneously protect the NBA's brand and redefine the WNBA's future under his supervision. But if Silver steps in, it won't just be about rescuing a league. It could mark the beginning of a new power era, where he controls both basketball empires. And that shift, while stabilizing in the short term, could change everything about how women's basketball operates. Because once Adam Silver takes the wheel, there's no going back. At the center of this storm sits the growing rebellion led by Nafisa Collier and Breena Stewart. What began as quiet frustration during labor talks has now turned into an open challenge to Kathy Engelbert's authority. These two stars aren't just negotiating for better pay, they're testing how much power they can seize from the league itself. Their movement, masked as a push for fairness, is starting to look like a calculated play for control. And the CBA negotiations have become the battlefield. Reports from inside the talks describe a tense divide. Collier and Stewart want full revenue transparency, claiming the league hides financial data to keep players in the dark. They've argued that without seeing the books, no one can trust the WNBA's claims of not yet profitable. Owners, however, counter that. Sharing those records would expose private business details that even NBA owners aren't allowed to see. That deadlock has deepened mistrust to dangerous levels. And while both sides claim they're protecting the game, it's clear that ego and influence now play as much a role as fairness. Behind this conflict is a growing fear among players that they've carried the league to record-breaking attention, yet still see little reward. The 2024 and 2025 seasons brought explosive growth, with TV ratings up 200% and sponsorship money pouring in, yet players' salaries remain capped, travel conditions remain uneven. And some believe the league spends more time protecting its image than its athletes. This resentment fuels the revolt. But the question remains, are Collier and Stewart truly leading a movement or manipulating a moment? ESPN's article titled Nafisa Collier, Kathy Engelbert, and a WNBA teetering on the brink painted a grim picture. Even while revenues were projected to surpass $1 billion, players saw only a fraction of it. Engelbert's public image as a corporate fixer hasn't helped. Her decades-long background in finance makes her a master at growing money not managing people. To her critics, she's detached, running the league like a balance sheet instead of a locker room. And that tone-deaf approach has only fanned the flames of rebellion. Collier and Stewart have turned that anger into leverage. With Unrivaled waiting in the wings, they hold a dangerous bargaining chip. If the WNBA won't meet their terms, they'll simply walk and take their followers with them. That's not negotiation. That's blackmail disguised as empowerment. What makes this rebellion even more volatile is that it's happening at the same time. The league finally began to capture mainstream attention. For the first time, the WNBA was breaking into sports culture. Yet now, its biggest stars are threatening to burn it all down. This rebellion has split the league in two: those who want reform and those who just want to play basketball. And in the middle of that divide stands one person who could unite it all: the player everyone is watching, Caitlin Clark. Because if she picks a side, the future of the WNBA follows her. Caitlin Clark didn't sign up to be the face of a political war, but that's exactly where she's ended up. Her arrival in the WNBA wasn't just a debut, it was a cultural earthquake. Ratings skyrocketed, arenas sold out, and merchandise flew off shelves. The league finally had a transcendent star who could bridge the gap between casual viewers and lifelong fans. But now, as the threat of a lockout grows louder, all eyes are on Clark to decide whether she'll stand with the players demanding change or with those desperate to keep the league alive. For Caitlin, the decision isn't simple. On one hand, she understands the players' frustration. She's seen how the league's structure limits income, marketing rights, and player visibility. She knows veteran players feel undervalued compared to her instant stardom. On the other hand, she also realizes what's at stake. A lost season doesn't just hurt the league, it erases everything she's helped build. Clark isn't just a player. She's the heartbeat of the WNBA's revival. If she walks away, the momentum dies overnight. Fans are already voicing their exhaustion. After years of drama, inconsistent officiating, and public infighting, many are tuning out. People didn't fall in love with the WNBA because of boardroom politics. They fell in love because of the magic. Clark brought every night she touched the floor. They tuned in to see the deep threes, the fiery competitiveness, and the energy she injected into every game. That's what reignited the league's pulse. But if she joins a boycott, fans will see it as betrayal. Not because she's wrong, but because she represents hope, and hope walking away is something the league might never recover from. The idea of Clark leading her own delegation has become a topic of serious debate. Some analysts have even suggested she could form a breakaway group of players. Those who reject the lockout and choose to play under new terms. Imagine a coalition led by Clark, joined by Angel Reese, A'ja Wilson, Sabrina Ionescu, and Paige Buchers, a lineup of marketable stars keeping the league alive while others walk away. That kind of move would redefine power dynamics in women's basketball. It would also expose just how divided the player community has become. But there's a risk. If Clark takes that path, she becomes both savior and target. Many veterans might view her as a corporate puppet, a young star protecting the establishment instead of standing with her peers. The backlash could be vicious. Yet Clark has something they don't leverage. She's the league's most valuable player, not just in stats, but in economics. Wherever she goes, fans and cameras follow. That's what makes her next move so critical. If she sides with the union, the lockout becomes inevitable. If she stands for the league, she might save it. Either way, her choice will define the WNBA's identity and its survival. Imagine a world where women's basketball fractures into two competing leagues, one led by Napheesa Collier and Breanna Stewart under Unrivaled, and the other centered around Caitlin Clark and the remaining WNBA stars determined to keep the game alive. That scenario, once unthinkable, is now being whispered in back rooms, podcasts, and player group chats. Insiders have started calling it the basketball civil war, and if the current tension continues, that nightmare could become reality. Unrivaled's plan looks deceptively simple. Present itself as a player-owned alternative that promises creative freedom, better pay transparency, and a flashy entertainment style. But beneath the slogans lies a calculated takeover. If Collier and Stewart successfully convince even a fraction of high-profile players to join, the WNBA instantly loses its credibility and fan draw. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark's faction, along with stars like A'ja Wilson and Sabrina Ionescu, would keep playing under the official WNBA banner, backed by loyal sponsors and fans who prefer tradition over rebellion. The result? 2 leagues fighting for attention, money, and legitimacy. While fans are left choosing sides, it's not just a sports story, it's a cultural divide. Unrivaled would brand itself as modern, bold, and for the players, the WNBA would position itself as historic, structured, and for the sport, it would mirror the chaotic split scene in professional wrestling when WWE and WCW competed for dominance, except this time, the audience is smaller, the stakes higher, and the margin for error non-existent. One misstep, and women's basketball could implode under the weight of its own ego wars. The economics make the split even more volatile. Sponsors aren't going to double their budgets to support 2 leagues. They'll pick one. Nike, ESPN, and Amazon have existing WNBA contracts that won't simply transfer to Unrivaled. That means the breakaway players would have to build everything from scratch: arenas, media deals, logistics, and branding, all while competing with a league that already has infrastructure. Even if Unrivaled survives its first season, sustaining it long-term would require millions in funding that no investor has guaranteed. But Unrivaled's real gamble isn't financial, it's emotional. They're betting that players will follow loyalty instead of logic. They're counting on anger, resentment, and frustration to fuel their rebellion long enough to gain traction. Yet history shows that splinter leagues rarely survive. When unity breaks, audiences scatter. The NBA once faced a similar threat during its rivalry with the ABA, but only one league emerged standing. That's the path women's basketball now faces. A future where 2 groups of incredible athletes compete, not for championships, but for validation. A fractured legacy that could erase decades of progress. And at the center of it all stands Cathy Engelbert, the commissioner accused of letting this chaos unfold. Because if she can't contain the fire Collier and Stewart started, the entire WNBA might burn to the ground. Cathy Engelbert was once praised as the woman who could transform the WNBA into a sustainable, modern sports enterprise. With over 3 decades of corporate experience and a reputation for steady leadership, she entered the commissioner's chair as the league's best hope for structure and stability. But today, her leadership is under siege from every direction. What was supposed to be her greatest achievement, guiding the WNBA into its golden era, is now unraveling into a public crisis that could define her downfall. On paper, Engelbert's tenure looks impressive. The league reached record-breaking viewership numbers, sponsorship deals soared, and expansion teams lined up with multi-million-dollar fees. She oversaw investments in charter flights, boosted player visibility, and reported that the WNBA's total revenue could surpass $1 billion. Yet, despite these wins, she's facing an open revolt from the very players her leadership was meant to protect. The disconnect lies not in performance metrics, but in perception. To players, Engelbert feels less like a commissioner and more like a CEO guarding profits. What infuriates players most is the feeling of exclusion. Decisions made behind closed doors, numbers shared selectively, and a tone that prioritizes corporate health over athlete well-being. Engelbert insists that financial caution is necessary for long-term success. But to frustrated stars like Collier and Stewart, it sounds like another excuse to maintain control. This tension has turned Engelbert into an unpopular figure within her own league. Her calm, polished demeanor, once an asset, now comes off as distant and unrelatable. Players want empathy and transparency, not corporate jargon and data sheets. Even fans have started questioning whether Engelbert truly understands the culture of her league. When officiating controversies erupted and player mistreatment became headlines, her responses often felt too measured, too sanitized. Meanwhile, social media fanned the flames with clips of players being ignored, fouled without calls, or mocked online, moments that demanded leadership with emotion, not spreadsheets. Instead of diffusing tension, Engelbert's silence only fueled it. Behind the scenes, owners still support her for now. She's brought in expansion revenue, stabilized sponsorships, and made the league look financially attractive to investors. But those same owners are watching the storm closely. If the lockout becomes reality, or if top players bolt for Unrivaled, their profits vanish overnight. That's when their loyalty will shift, not toward Engelbert, but toward the person with the power to clean up the mess. Adam Silver. Rumors are already swirling that Silver is preparing to take a more active role, potentially overriding Engelbert's authority to save the WNBA's reputation. If that happens, it would mark the end of her independence as commissioner. Engelbert's downfall wouldn't be about financial mismanagement, it would be about losing the trust of her players. And once that bond is gone, no amount of expansion money or TV deals can save her. The only question now is whether Silver acts before the collapse becomes irreversible. If the lockout happens and the 2026 season disappears, the WNBA won't just lose time, it will lose its audience. Professional sports rely on rhythm and routine, and once that rhythm breaks, fans move on. For a league that only recently captured mainstream attention, even one missed season could erase years of progress. People who once spent summer nights cheering for Caitlin Clark or A'ja Wilson will simply find something else to watch. And when the lights finally come back on, they might not return at all. America's sports landscape is unforgiving. The NFL dominates the fall, college football steals the weekends, and baseball stretches across the summer months. The WNBA carved its small but growing space through momentum, consistency, and cultural relevance. But if the 2026 season vanishes, all that progress evaporates. Networks will reallocate airtime, sponsors will redirect funding, and even social media buzz, once the league's biggest advantage, will fade into silence. A lockout wouldn't just pause the WNBA, it would reset it back to obscurity. The heartbreak is that this collapse wouldn't come from lack of talent or fan interest, it would come from ego and poor leadership. Players feel underpaid and unheard, while executives insist the league isn't profitable enough to meet their demands. Both sides are right in their own way, but neither seems willing to bend. And when two forces pull in opposite directions long enough, something breaks. Unfortunately, what's breaking now is trust from fans, from media partners, and from the very people who once believed women's basketball could finally stand on equal footing. Even die-hard supporters are growing exhausted. Many fans who were thrilled by the 2024 and 2025 seasons now admit they're suffering from what some call WNBA fatigue. They love the game, but hate the drama. They came to watch basketball, not boardroom wars, and as debates over pay, politics, and personal rivalries dominate headlines, the actual sport fades into the background. If 2026 becomes a year of silence, that fatigue could harden into indifference. And indifference is the death of any league. This is where Adam Silver's intervention becomes the last hope. If he can stabilize negotiations, rebuild player confidence, and convince sponsors to stay, the WNBA might survive the storm. But even with his guidance, rebuilding momentum will take years. Once fans lose faith, you can't just flip a switch and bring them back. It takes stories, heroes, and moments, the kind Caitlin Clark provided when she reignited passion in the game. The WNBA stands at a crossroads. One path leads toward compromise, revival, and a stronger future. The other leads toward silence, fractured loyalties, and fading relevance. The countdown has already started, and if someone doesn't pull the league back from the edge soon, the 2026 lockout won't just mark a temporary break. It will mark the moment women's basketball lost its heartbeat and never found it again. After 27 years of struggle, growth, and perseverance, the WNBA now faces the greatest test of its existence. What began as a fight for fairness has spiraled into a power struggle that threatens to erase everything the league has achieved. Napheesa Collier and Breena Stewart's rebellion, unrivaled shadow ambitions, and Cathy Engelbert's faltering leadership have all collided into a single defining moment. Now, the fate of the league rests in the hands of Adam Silver, and perhaps most importantly, Caitlin Clark. If cooler heads prevail, the WNBA could emerge stronger, more unified, and finally respected as a Premier League. But if pride wins over progress, 2026 could become the year women's basketball vanished from the spotlight. The clock is ticking, and one thing is certain: whatever happens next will decide the future of the game forever.